Hey, Kate, what did you eat last night?
I went to this lovely little restaurant that's actually in the zoo here in Chicago. And it has a beautiful view of like a little lagoon or a pond and some gorgeous like foliage and stuff. And a friend of mine took me there and it was lovely. And we had fried green tomatoes, which were delicious, which I love, with a yummy buttermilk dressing. And a achiote, I think is how you say it, grilled chicken breast. It's a really mild chili. So the chicken breast had been marinated in that, and it was delicious, and sweet potato fries, which were fantastic.
Oh, what a good combo at the zoo. That's great.
At the zoo. I normally don't go to the zoo because they make me sad, but I didn't have to see any animals, so it was okay.
It's always a good day.
How about you?
I had what was supposed to be a burnt eggplant dish with garlic, lemon, and pomegranate seeds.
But what happened?
Okay. I burned the heck out of the eggplant because from what I understand, the whole idea is to burn the eggplant so that smoky quality gets into the entire eggplant. I can't tell you how long I burnt this eggplant for. An hour and a half. And still no burnt flavor. So it just turns out to be some weird sort of garlicly mashy dish with lemon and garlic and olive oil.
Sounds like it could use a little smoked paprika to give it that smoky flavor.
Oh, yeah. God, I don't even have any of that. I need to put that in my staples. Welcome to another episode of You Won't Believe What I Ate Last Night. I am Rick Fiore.
And I'm Kate DeVore.
And this is our ongoing conversation about food, health, weight management, and our endeavor to be and stay healthy in a really tasty world.
With love, kindness, and compassion towards ourselves and others.
Hey, Kate, have you been watching Chef's Table?
Yes, I have. I love it.
The best show ever.
Oh, I totally love it. I just discovered it. I've only watched like 4 or 5 episodes because I just finally have come into this millennium and gotten Netflix.
You edge liver. So Chef's Table is a documentary series that's original to Netflix, and it profiles some of the most renowned chefs in the world. And each episode, they sort of take you on this voyage of just into the kitchen of the chef, and it's so beautifully shot. They're just exquisite pieces of art.
It's really lovely. Each episode is an hour-long documentary about a chef, and it goes into that person's life and their psyche and their work, and their food and their challenges and successes in creating their restaurants and stuff. And it's really quite lovely. And the first episode was about an Italian chef whose name unfortunately escapes me. All I know is that I want to take a pilgrimage to that little town in Italy where his restaurant is and really eat there.
Yeah, pretty staggering. Was he the one with all the cheese?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I don't know that there was even that much cheese. He just had a couple of key dishes that were cheese involved, and they stuck with you because they were delicious and because it's Italian. Yeah.
Yeah. What I love is this series really just shows the artistry and the artist behind the kitchen that you don't often get to experience. And sometimes it just makes me weep, particularly, when you just see how much they care and what they want to do.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons it strikes us is that it's about your work being art. No matter what your work is, you can turn it into art. And these guys are using it. Guys, there's women too. I use that term gender neutrally, are using their work in the food industry as chefs for expression and freedom and creativity. And there's just these variations on a theme that comes up with every single one of these chefs, that they are bringing all themselves into what they're doing and sometimes even being what they can't be through their work.
And this ties so beautifully into, and I forget when we said it, Kate, but this was on one of our original podcasts, that one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is because that's what we're interested in doing. We're interested in bringing ourselves fully, right, into a sense of creativity and what we really, really want, and putting ourselves into it and just examining it. And so that's why I resonate with it so much, because they're really just trying to use all of their faculties that they have to, do what they want to do. And that's what breaks my heart about it a little bit.
And I just have tremendous admiration for dedication and skill, because I know how many hours it takes to do something well. And when you look at these people doing something well, I just weep when I watch anybody do anything really well.
Yeah.
and when it's combined with food and art, oh my God, it's amazing.
Exactly.
And the other theme that I think resonates with both of us is the idea of respect for the food and where it came from and connecting with nature. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the specifics of it. But the idea of really respecting your medium and respecting your work and respecting your plants and animals and your colleagues and yourself and all of that is important.
And to ask what that really means on every level in relation to what you do. And I think this applies to whether or not you're doing a podcast with, one of your best friends. If you're a mom, right? If you go in and this whole idea of whatever it is you're choosing to do, how do you do it and do it like you've never done it before? I love that idea.
And so much of that, I think, comes back also to what we talked about in our last episode of mindfulness and being present with it and being mindful with it. That is a big deal.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, Rick, did you know that eating a Mediterranean diet and regularly consuming olive oil can reduce the risk of major cardiovascular events and death by 30%, which includes stroke, heart attack, or death from any other cardiovascular-related causes?
I didn't know it was good. I didn't realize to that extent.
So the first specific chef we want to talk about is Dan Barber, which is episode 2 of season 1. For those of you following along, who
already
is in Blue Hill, New York, and the Berkshires in Massachusetts.
So he's just there. They consider him like he's a celebrated chef. Obviously, he's a dedicated farmer, and they consider him like a food industry revolutionary because of the way that overall he's really thinking about. How do you bring what's on the farm to his table? So he has this farm in, is it upstate New York, Kate?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where it is? He brings all this, so he has a farm that he runs, I think with his brother. And so whatever they're growing, it's like this sort of fun experiment of what can they bring from their farm to cook in their restaurant in New York. One of the things he says is that a restaurant has an overriding purpose and a message, that it's about something. And I love that idea that it somehow transcends food.
Yeah. And he's a big pioneer of the farm to table movement. And I feel like I learned a lot about what farm to table actually means by watching this episode. And one of the definitions of it is simply that it's ethical and sustainable. But then I think he goes beyond that. And the reason he's a pioneer is the way he's encouraging farmers to breed differently. So he's talking with farmers about breeding produce for flavor. Because so much of our produce is bred to be able to travel long distances and stored for a long period of time.
Functionality.
Exactly. And that's very different than breeding the tastiest thing. And so you watch these people eat these vegetables from this garden and they're like, I have never had a squash that tasted like that before. And you believe them. You're like, no, I bet I've never had that either.
Didn't he hire a breeder? And he's like, what do you want me to do? And he's like, I want you to breed for flavor. And wasn't the breeder like, whoa, you're asking me to breed for flavor?
Yeah, because the agribusiness is about shelf life and keeping it fresh, not flavor. So the breeders were so excited to have a canvas to get to play with.
And going back to the farm to table idea, one of the books I was reading, I think it was one of Michael Pollan's books. He talks about how one of the reasons that farm to table movement came about is that it was a direct response to sort of, the large agriculture business, big A's, chemically controlled monoculture. And they say this is where one of the reasons it started. So I love that idea.
Yeah. And he talks about thinking about foods we eat in terms of also what growing those foods does and give back to the soil to maintain the fertility in the food source. So that's a whole nother element of this kind of work is they're not just thinking about the food, they're thinking about the crops in terms of keeping the soil rich and healthy and full of nutrients so that it can keep doing cool and amazing new things.
One of the things he says is this idea, I want to get the quote right. When you chase after the best flavor, you're chasing after the best ingredients. And when you're chasing after the best ingredients, you're chasing after the best farming.
That's so cool. So it all comes back to the local farmer.
Yeah. And also there's just this whole idea, right? Which I'm sure you and I both love, which is coming back to the earth, to Mother Earth, to letting it start there.
Totally.
To let everything rise up from there.
Yeah. And one of his visions, he said, is I want people to leave here, meaning his restaurant, and feel like they've connected with nature. So part of his vision is bringing nature onto your plate and into our mouths and bellies.
Can I tell you when I cried during his show?
Yes.
I cried when he said, when you treat nature well, it gives you the gift of good food.
Oh.
And he was talking about that because remember how, he talked about how he needed, you can help. He needed, fertilizer, so they had to get a specific animal. Then they needed an animal to deal with the fertilizer. Yeah. But somehow it all led to calves.
Yeah.
And veal.
Yes.
And how he's like, now I got to deal with, male calves. So I'm like, how am I going to deal with that? So he's like, well, we got to deal with them in the best possible way because they're usually and we know, everyone pretty much at this point probably knows how veal is dealt with when it's alive, right?
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good.
And just the way that he's going to take that, he understands that something has to happen, but he's going to do his best to honor it. Ugh, breaks my heart.
Yeah, and the fact that the animals are kindly and humanely raised goes without saying. And then also he said this wonderful phrase that was, you are what you eat, but you are what you eats too. So it's not just about the cow, it's about what the cow is eating. And I swear the meat and dairy in England is so much tastier than in the United States as far as I'm concerned.
Really?
And the only thing we can figure out is it's the grass because they're eating that grass and they have that lush, beautiful green grass. And I think that plays a role. So it's the same idea.
They refer to him as the ethical restaurateur, which I liked.
Totally. He also made this point that was jarring to me, which had never occurred to me. He said, there's no such thing really as an American cuisine. He said, because I've thought about that, what is American food really? What do we eat here? Hamburgers, but what does that mean, And he said, there isn't really an American cuisine. It is mediocre ingredients in large quantities. And
totally.
The idea is that, and this was fascinating to me, that we had such abundance when we moved here as immigrants that we didn't have to learn how to use the whole animal, how to use the whole vegetable, how to eat the weird grains. We had such abundance from a food perspective from where we'd come from that we just were like, oh, awesome, we'll just eat the great part. And, and so we've become just really wasteful and disrespectful of the food.
It's so funny you say that because one of the things I wrote down is how he was talking about cuisines of other places. And he says, and he wasn't talking about American cuisine, but he said, most of the greatest cuisines of the world come out of hardship because people they've been forced into a negotiation between peasants and landscape. That they, in the sense that they've had to figure it out. They've had to figure out to use what they have, to use it well, and to use it all.
My mom has always said, and you know how much I agree with my mom when it comes to cooking stuff, that she always says, I love peasant food.
She's our third podcast partner.
She totally is. But she always says, I love peasant food. And it's true. Peasant food is usually really tasty. It's rich and flavorful and because they've figured stuff out. And it's based on ingenuity, which is also admirable in its way. The last quote that I wanted to reference was that he said, isn't our life one way to fill a void after another? Isn't life just filling one void after another? And he's doing it by running and working and creating all this amazing sustainable stuff and having a family and these successful restaurants. But the idea of life being about filling one void after another and about that being what's sort of keeping him moving in his life, I thought was an interesting perspective that we might want to expand on in future, perhaps in our own way.
I agree, because when he said that, it resonated with me because I love the idea of void, or space, however you want to use it, because there's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing. People sometimes see that as negative. Oh, you're trying to fill a void. Well, yeah, I'm trying to fill something that I want. I'm trying to bring in something that's missing to make me a more complete human being. What a great idea.
Totally. Exactly. And Dan Barber would agree with you. Yeah.
Totally.
Exactly. Okay, now we can go on to the next one we were going to talk about.
All right, so the next one is Niki Nakayama.
Actually, weren't we going to talk about Frances Mallmann?
Oh, let's do Frances Mallmann, sure.
Just because it's in order. So again,
I get you.
For people listening along.
I was doing them in order of preference.
Oh. Sorry. No, we'll do Frances Mallmann because we have less to say about him too, I think.
We're flexible on the podcast here.
That's right. So this is episode 3. It's the next episode in the series. And he is from Patagonia, which is the bottom of Argentina near Chile. I'm sure you guys knew that, and only I had to look it up. But just for the record,
I'm sitting
that's
here
where
thinking,
Patagonia is.
I'm so glad you looked that up. I did not look that up.
There we go. And his big theme is you have to respect what you you cook.
You have to respect what you cook. And his other big thing that he does is he's cooking like outdoors. He's like outside in nature, that he thinks that whatever you cook, particularly these animals, and cooking them over these open fires really breeds this sort of amazing wild flavor. I have to say, all the meat he was cooking, I did want to eat it.
It was lovely.
Even though I don't.
And he's right there on the water, and he's cooking on the earth in a pit, and he's using fire, and he is a fire master. He understands every nuance of fire and how you cook different things on different stages and phases of a fire.
And I just love how he has this whole little crew of like wood elves, you know what I mean? Just running through the woods, digging pits and lighting fires and dealing with charcoal. And then they sat down to eat. It was so great because I was like, when are these people going to eat this food? And I just love that his whole free spirit sensibility just went really well. Like it matched that he's so free, he's so wild, and it just matches so wonderfully with the outdoors that he's in.
Totally. So, right. His life and therefore his work is very much about freedom and working with nature. And that has certainly caused some issues in any sort of personal life and marriages he's tried to maintain.
Dutifully try to, but not very well. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's been out in the fire pit, so with his elves, I think has been the problem there. But
but the reason he's so inspirational is there's just a wonderful sense of freedom in relation to what he does. And you know, Kate and I often talk a lot about this. Sometimes is that sometimes we can get a little caught up in what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But you know, just trusting that sense of freedom, just to go with it, that trust, if you really just do what you want to do and let it come, that there's a lot of value in that. And you just ride that wave. It's a really beautiful idea.
Yeah, it's that challenge of not getting too heady about stuff so you don't trip over yourself, but also not heady at all so that nothing happens. It's that middle ground.
And not so much freedom, you destroy all your relationships.
Exactly. That's the middle ground that we're talking about. Right. And the last thing I have to say about that one is the quote in that one that made me cry was he was talking about Patagonia, the region he's in, but he said, once you understand how she is, you start to love her. And I loved that quote. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Hey, Kate, did you know that pound cake got its name from its original recipe, which called for a pound each of butter, egg, sugar, and flour?
Actually, I did know that.
Nice. All right, Niki Nakayama.
Niki Nakayama. I just wanted to say
I love saying that name.
Episode 4, and she's based in LA, and she has a restaurant called Nanaka or N Naka. I think it's N Naka.
It's N Naka, yeah.
So it's letter N/Naka.
Well, I mean, another episode that I just cried through. She says, this is what I love about her. She's one of the first things she says early on is she says, cooking is the one thing I really feel like I can trust when I'm doing. It's a meditative state. When you watch her, like she is in it. There's nothing else. It's just there. It's consistent. It's steady. Her mind is always like where it needs to be.
I wrote this down, and I don't know if I wrote this down because it was the voiceover saying it, or if I wrote it down because it was my thought. So I might be quoting from the show, or I might be saying this. I don't know which it is, but it is this. Watching her.
This is a segment we call Kate Makes Things Up.
Kate either makes things up or steals them blatantly from other people. She's not sure which. Watching her cook is a study in meditation. Her relationship with the food, her feel, her being in the flow, in the moment is really just beautiful to watch.
Oh, that's great. So one of the things that's really wonderful about Niki Nakayama is that she comes from a family where a lot was not expected of a woman. And it was very hard for her to stand up for what she wants, to voice what she wants. And then even when she could do that, you could tell there's just a little bit of trepidation about the family business, which was a big fishing business or a fishing business that their dad had started. There was a lot of trepidation about supporting her in her endeavor. And she talked a lot about the strength that it took to overcome that and how much she responds to this idea that the minute someone tells her that she can't do something, then she just goes, I'm going to do it. Like it snaps in her. She's like, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it better than anyone has ever seen it done.
And she described there's actually a Japanese word for that, which is kuyashi, which is the Japanese word for when somebody puts you down and tells you you can't do something, and then it fires you up to prove them wrong.
Ugh, don't we all need a little bit of that?
Kuyashi.
Say it again, Kate.
Kuyashi.
I love that. Can I tell you, I actually had that written down and I was praying you would say it. I didn't want to have to pronounce it.
There we go. And her whole thing is an expressive variation on a style that's very rigid, classical, and formal, which I thought was interesting because that's like so much art. So much famous art through the ages has been a reaction to the structure that came before it.
And she made sure she understood that structure before she reinterpreted it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a variation on that rigid classical style of this particular type of Japanese meal that's a certain number of courses that has to be done a very specific way. And she makes her spin on it with knowing very, very, very well how it's done. And her philosophy, I love this, is using the best ingredients and not ruining them.
Oh, that's great.
That's it. So it comes back again to just respect for what you're doing and using the simplest stuff.
I know we both resonated with this element in her, how much she really sees the people that come to her restaurant as a vital part of the evening. She honors them. She respects them. She thinks they've put this time aside. They save this money because it's pretty pricey and they've gone through all the effort to be here. So people that come to her restaurant, she actually keeps a catalog on them. She knows their names.
A binder.
She knows when they came. She knows what they had last time. So when they come into the restaurant a second time, she pulls their file and she makes sure that they get something new, entirely new for all the courses. That's like one of her big endeavors because she thinks they deserve it.
Yeah, she plans the entire night's menu around that to please them and not to repeat. Yeah. Because her mentor had said, when a customer returns to my restaurant, I already know what they're going to order. I send them over something right away. And she says, how do you know? And he says, you're my customer. Of course I know you.
She says that she owes it to the guest to provide them the experience she's envisioned for them. I'm like, ugh. Brilliant.
I can barely remember my clients' names that I see every week. Like the idea of remembering everyone that's ever come in, and it's amazing.
Well, one of the stories I always tell at the yoga studio is I had some guy in my class and I could not remember his name for an entire month. And then I felt embarrassed because I didn't want to ask. So finally, like, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. I was like, what's your name? And he's like, Rick.
That makes sense.
Oh, man.
I can see why you didn't remember it, though. Yeah. Yeah. So she has this attitude of being really grateful and wanting to please everyone that comes in. And coming back to the idea of you had mentioned earlier about the gender issues in her upbringing. So in a world, she's in this world where the food gets criticized because it's made by a woman. I think it's hard enough to be a chef, but to be a Japanese chef as a woman, I think is really hard. And her ego is so small that she chooses not to let people know who the chef is so that it doesn't distract from the food. So she will not let people know that a woman cooked it because she knows that in that culture and in that community of that particular group of people that it would detract, and she doesn't want it to detract from their experience.
That's beautiful. And, she says something that you and I often talk quite a bit about, Kate, which is she said one of the things, she says the best advice she ever got was to never stop learning. And you and I are that way, that we always want to learn, and we want to learn from people that can lift us up, that can pull us up, that can make us better. Mm-hmm. And she was just talking about these little tomatoes because they followed her when she went shopping. And she was just talking about how beautiful they were and how much effort that it took to grow them. And she said this great thing that everything deserves effort because it is making an effort. A tomato took 3 months to grow, and that should be respected.
Oh, I love that. And she gave us another word. I'm going to get the stress wrong on this one, I think, but it's something like kaiseki. And it's
kaiseki, that's correct. Very good.
Thank you. And it's the philosophy
that's exactly how I remember it.
You make use of what you have locally, and the integrity of the ingredient should never get lost, and that there is a specific progression of techniques and flavors within these kinds of meals that she prepares.
And I think when I was going back to the thing I just said, that, when you think about the effort that's gone into everything and that it should be respected, I often think that of people, for better or for worse, right? A lot's gone into making a person who they are, And this idea that you and I talk about when we talk about not compassion towards just compassion towards ourselves, but compassion towards others, it's often a way I think about looking at other people is to really just think that so much has gone in to making them who they are. I don't understand most of it, but to really sort of like have compassion, to keep that global idea that it's just not this random thing that got just dropped onto the earth from Mars, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And maybe there's a reason they're doing that thing that you think is unreasonable, or the observer thinks is unreasonable.
And that's just a great way to practice compassion and kindness towards others. I mean, we talk a lot about it towards ourselves, but when you see that person, it took a lot to grow them.
Totally right. Like, and if I can have compassion for a tomato, then and for a dog, maybe I could translate that to the guy who cut me off in traffic. Maybe there's something there. Yeah.
I often wish I could have as much kindness and compassion for people as I do for dogs and animals.
I know, right? It's so much easier.
I really try.
I know.
Because I'm like, the dog doesn't know any better. I'm like, neither does the person. They should, but they don't.
I know. It's a tough one. It's a tough one, isn't it?
It is a tough one.
Yeah.
But
Another
so is
thing
our
that
journey.
Both she and Mallmann talked about, which I thought was interesting, was quitting at the top of your game so that you don't get stale and you make room for something new, which I think is fascinating and terrifying. And I wonder if that has something to do with your art being ephemeral. So both of them, if their art is food, it is by nature ephemeral. It's not like a painting or a sculpture or whatever. And, she talks about the food can be things that I'm not comfortable being. So her food is very clearly her art. So maybe if your art is temporary, like those people who make those amazing sand sculptures and snow sculptures, maybe there's something about that makes it easier for them to think about leaving and stopping and making room for something new, because maybe they have a bravery about that I don't have, because I don't want to quit at the top of my game.
Totally. And when you said bravery, the word that dropped into my head is conditioning. They're so conditioned to live that way, to be at the top of their game. Then there it goes. Got to be at the top of my game again. There it goes. Like they literally see it disappear nightly. And one of the reviewers, because in all of these shows, they usually have a critic or a reviewer who's doing some voiceover. And one of the big critics in LA had said, as a diner, you feel cared about there. And I do have to say, like, that's a really interesting quality to experience from a restaurant and for me, I translate it this way, that I just want to know that my money is important to you as an organization, right? And then if I get anything beyond that, awesome. You know?
Yeah, and food is so about nurturing, and whenever you see little things about restaurants that people like, it's because they feel friendly and they come in and they know who, where everybody knows your name and, they greet you personally. So that totally makes sense. Yeah. But even like our expectations are so low that we just want somebody to care at all that we're there and have respect for us as the diner. Yeah.
I'm just so grateful when a waiter or waitress acknowledges my tip.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm like, oh, they saw it. It's just not another 20%. It meant something.
Yeah.
Even if it is, like, still 20%, like every other 20% they've gotten.
Yeah. At least say thank you. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, we ask you to follow us on Facebook, subscribe on iTunes, on SoundCloud, and most importantly now on YouTube. We're about to start putting some videos up on YouTube, so that is getting to be a more complex thing. So please do follow along there and send us your thoughts to youwon'tbelievewhatIate@gmail.com. Visit our website, youwon'tbelievewhatIate.com.
And as always, if you want to support the podcast, please do. There's a link on our Facebook page where you can use PayPal to make a donation to support our work. We appreciate it. And members who support us, they get access to really special material from Kate and I.
We're working on creating a folder on YouTube for that, for special member-only materials. So those of you who have already supported us, we will let you know when we have that folder up and ready. But we're on it. We're on it, people.
Coming.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening.